So it's been a good while since I updated the top 3 gods for every role series, and there's been some huge changes with the mid-season patch, as well as new items, and the mid-season meta seems to have settled down a bit, so I think we're definitely overdue for an update here. So for those who haven't seen any of my previous videos in this format, I basically take every conquest role and basically share my thoughts on the best 3 gods for each role and why they're strong at the moment. It's partly my own opinion and experiences, but also looking at popular streamers and creators and the Pro League and what's doing well at all levels of play. I usually try to update these every few patches when there's been a significant meta shift, so if you want to stay updated on the Smite meta on a regular basis without having to watch like a 40-minute tier list video, then be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. But without further ado, let's kick this off with the top 3 junglers. So junglers have had a lot of changes to their core meta with the last few patches, with some buffs and nerfs, bringing in new gods and sending out old ones. The first rising star in the jungle is Thor. After the partial rework to his 3 and ultimate in the mid-season patch, his damage comes out faster and there's more of it, taking what was a fairly balanced and playable character before and bringing him into the top tier after the changes. Having access to that semi-global ultimate as a ganking tool is something that not many other junglers have access to and can make Thor very hard to play around, especially if you aren't warding correctly. He has very flexible builds, he can go into pretty much any item that has physical power and penetration and be good to go. Mace Tree, Transcendence, Hydras, Void Shield, or even a little more defense from Cloaks. But in general I do prefer Thor with some more burst damage, but going into late game it's definitely viable to transition into a more bruiser style of play, and your build can reflect that. There's just not much that Thor doesn't have. Insane level 1 jungle clear with an 8-second cooldown on his 3, great burst damage, great CC, pretty standard mobility but also that semi-global mobility. Thor is super strong right now and I'm sure a lot of you have seen him in your games. Jungler number 2 is Erlang Shen. So a little while ago, Erlang was a top tier jungler, and for whatever reason he lost his relevance, but he's definitely back with a force now. Great early game, can pretty much outbox any other jungler in the game early on besides maybe Pele, but even she can have trouble boxing Erlang if you play around the passive correctly. Fairly fast camp clear, it's not on the level of Thor for example, but it's good enough to keep him even with most junglers in the meta, and God forbid Erlang gets ahead and he can kill you in 3 autos plus turtle. He can even outfight Thor for most of the early to mid game in a 1v1 scenario depending on how you play it, and can even use Turtle to cancel his hammer teleport if he's trying to get away. The only thing Erlang lacks really when stacked against Thor is the mobility factor. Erlang does different things to Thor, but he is almost as strong I think. And he also has the picks and bans value of being able to flex into 2 other roles being solo and support besides his main jungle pick. And the final jungler in my eyes is still Aokwang. This one is unchanged for a long time, we still haven't hit the point where Aokwang has fallen off in play rate and ban rate just yet. He's just one of those gods that sleeps for half a season, people forget how to fight him, and then he comes back with force and shits on everyone's dreams. Personally, I think he is a step down from these other 2 junglers due to his weak early game. A good Thor or Erlang player can easily shut down an Aokwang early on, invade everything he has, and close out the game before he can get his core items done. But in a scenario where Ao is allowed to do Ao things, he is one of the hardest carries you can put in the jungle role, especially for mid-level ranked, since Aokwang really shines in the absence of coordination and communication. With the nerfs to the ring tree, Aokwang does take a hit, but I think he'll still be worthy of a top 3 position for now. We'll see where he is next time when I update this, because it's definitely possible he falls out of top 3 for the next iteration. Alright, so let's move on to some mid laners. So another huge rising star after some changes is Mrs. Demonetized herself. The Goddess of Magic has seen a huge resurrection in play, and she's definitely contending for top mid laner right now. Her early game is uncontested hands down by any other mid laner. She gets to lane quite quickly, has fast speed buff clear for the jungler so they can arrive to mid lane faster, and combined with her pressure at the first waves from Wingust, you'll be out clearing everyone else so you can meet your jungler and look for early kills, mid camps, red buff invades, whatever you want really. Just take the pressure that she gives you and run with it. Snowball into early objectives using that ultimate and you're good to go. She's super strong right now. Mid laner number 2 is a familiar face, that being Merlin. So he's taken some actually pretty severe nerfs since his release, but even with all that's been thrown at him, I still think he clings to a top 3 mid laner spot. I don't think I really need to explain why Merlin is still a strong mid laner. If you've been playing Smite in the last 6 months, you probably understand why. Insane use of Spear of the Magus and Gem of Isolation, even with the nerfs. More raw damage output than every other mid laner. Zone control for days. Quite safe with the blink, not incredibly so, but it's good enough, especially with Merlin's self-peel being to just drop his kit on himself and kill melee attackers or slow them to a snail's crawl with Gem of Isolation and run away last spamming. Yeah, Merlin's still very strong. And the final mid laner is another one you probably expected if you've been playing Smite in the last month or 2, Amuzencab. So I am putting him here for the mid lane, and I don't want the same god twice for 2 different roles, but AMC can definitely work in the ADC role too if that's your jam. Very high lane pressure early on, he won't outcompete the Goddess of Magic, but against most other mage picks and a lot of hunter mids as well, he can outpressure and use those high damage auto attacks and Bs to poke enemies, which forces them to concede pressure on mid camps. Or maybe even lose their own red buff, which will just snowball you into AMC's incredibly strong mid game. He does have the obvious AMC weaknesses of low mobility, and a good Thor for example will give him a hard time walling him off and dunking on him from out of nowhere. But with some good ward coverage and a high pressure jungler to cover him, he's definitely a top tier pick right now despite his nerfs in recent patches. Okay, moving on, let's talk about some solo laners. So Arthur is still here. Yeah, the nerfs he's been receiving simply aren't enough. Yes, they are impactful, and he's no longer hands down the best solo laner in my opinion. These other two solo laners that I have actually compete with him for the top spot, which is something you couldn't say about Arthur previous to these nerfs. But also, I think a factor in his lower play rate is just that people are bored of him being in every game. He's definitely counterable with a coordinated team that's buying anti-heal and focusing him down, but that's not always the environment you get in Smite casuals or even in ranked really, which means Arthur still remains a top 3 solo laner. One of the few solo picks that can carry a game right now, especially in mid-level ranked is where he shines. Low-level players don't utilise him properly, and high-level players know how to exploit his weaknesses, hence his lack of play in the SPL. Solo laner number 2 is Set. So as with AMC in mid lane, Set can also flex into a jungle pick as well if you want to play him there, but where he shines the most is in solo lane. Build Glad Shield and defense and he can outtrade a lot of popular solo lane picks and actually has a surprisingly high burst and poke due to skewer and the fact that the clones are uninteractable. There's nothing the enemy can do about them, so if you just spawn 3 or 4 clones near the wave, any melee solo laner, which is basically all of them, has to either back up and let you have lane pressure or take a ton of burst from skewer while they try to clear the wave. And you get to clear the wave and poke with one ability, which is insanely strong. Not to mention it's only on a 7-second cooldown. With Blue Buff and Glad Shield for 20% CDR, you can burst them every 5.3 seconds. It's pretty insane. Set is also very safe on ganks due to the instant teleport. If you have a fast reaction time and you know it's coming, you can definitely dodge Thor ults and Rat ults with his teleport and be super safe that way. Also, Set's autos are just insanely good for trading against other solo lane warriors and guardians. Having that free 25% attack speed from level 1 on the passive works wonders with his early to mid game lane trading. Set takes a specific style of player and has a super high skill ceiling, but for those who can make him work, they will have a field day in solo lane right now. And the final solo laner is Nike. Now, there were some contenders that I did want to put here, but ultimately weren't stronger than any of these 3 picks that I have. Like Bellona, Osiris, and Yom, for example. But Nike is stomping right now, and I can't not include her as a top 3 solo laner. After the partial rework in the mid-season patch, she shot up to top tier, having access to triple rend without needing to use the extra mana on a separate ability, which was huge for her early game wave clear and trades in lane. And not only did she save the mana on the ability, she also has an actually useful ability to replace the old 2 that was basically just used to activate rend. Not to mention she can be damn near immortal in teamfights when you stack Pridwin and a lot of defense on top of her ultimate, and she can do really well at diving a lot of the top picks like AMC, Skadi and Merlin with that potent slow on the ultimate and the fast jump knockup. And she's also quite a safe solo laner. She can overextend a lot more than other solo laners can because of that massive health shield. Nike just has to be included in this one, so here she is. Alright, second to last roll, let's talk about some ADCs. So as I just mentioned, Skadi is definitely a top 3 ADC after the mid-season changes that basically put Kaldor on steroids. She has probably the best pressure of any god you're looking at in the ADC role. Maybe Anher or AMC can match her, but even they struggle to trade 1-1 or 1-2 with Skadi throughout basically all the early and mid-game. While Skadi does fall off later on when Kaldor gets bursted super quickly in 5 auto attacks, and her lack of true mobility can hurt her in teamfights, but given the pressure and invades you can get from the laning phase, you can come out with such a huge lead that her lack of late game doesn't matter that much. Skadi is super strong right now. The second ADC is Kronos. I think even despite the ring nurse in the last couple of patches, Kronos still remains a top tier ADC. He's sort of the opposite to Skadi in that he's really looking for that mid to late game where he can just annihilate people, but doesn't have amazing lane pressure early on. It's not terrible, but if you're playing him into the likes of Skadi or AMC, you're going to feel the burn a bit for the first 15 minutes of the game, and will probably have to play pretty passive. Maybe even concede a few purple buffs, but once Kronos reaches his power spikes and gets towards that late game, it becomes near unstoppable with some decent peel and that ultimate. Plus, having that magical ADC like Kronos allows you to play a hunter mid, for example, like AMC that I mentioned, so that's really powerful too. So for this final ADC pick, there could have definitely been a few here. As I mentioned, AMC is a solid ADC if you aren't playing him in mid, but I don't want him on the list twice. Anher can also be great in ADC as well as his more typical mid lane pick right now. Jingwei is the ever-strong safe hunter pick, but overall I think Olorun has the most potential to be truly top tier, even if right now it might not seem that way. I have a lot of faith in Olorun, and I think he just needs a little bit more time for people to figure him out before he emerges as a true top tier ADC. The ultimate is being slept on, straight up. I don't know if people just see that it does no damage and call it bad or what, but it counts as so many different picks, it's insane. Have you ever tried to double tap someone as Thor while you're in an Olorun ult? It's basically impossible. Erlang barely moves in his 3 and his ult takes 7 years to wind up. Spirit Ball slows down once it enters the ultimate area and fucks up the timing. There's so many uses for it, and his base kit supports it really well too. I think he's a sleeper pick, but as I mentioned, a few other picks could definitely contest this spot as of right now. We'll have to see in the coming weeks what really happens with the ADC meta. Alright, let's finish up the video with support picks. Firstly, to no one's surprise, it's Ares. After the buff, his lane pressure is hands down the best of any support. The only thing he really lacked early on before was wave clear, and he just got given some solid wave clear on a silver platter with the mid-season patch. He dominates the duo lane laning phase, and half the time will be out damaging the rest of his team for the first 10 minutes due to Shackles just being busted. He's even able to play a great solo and a surprisingly good jungle too, due to Flames being great for excellent early camp clear and wave clear, and being able to outfight most of the junglers early on. Get someone on your team that can burn beads and Magi's Cloak from the enemy team and just go to town with this god. Second support in my opinion is Horus. I had this guy on my top 3 last time when a lot of other people were sleeping on him, and I think he's definitely solidified himself as a top support. While his ultimate is incredibly hard to use correctly, especially on uncoordinated casual and ranked teams, the rest of his core kit is so insanely strong that it pretty much carries him to top tier on its own. 2 dashes, a knock-up, a stun, a heal, plenty of damage, another heal on the passive. His base kit is just so strong, and he can pair really well with both aggressive ADCs and defensive ones by simply switching up his playstyle, which I think makes him a super valuable pick for support right now. But definitely for support, I really don't see Horus working as a solo laner at all. And the final support, and god for the video in my opinion, is Athena. This one could be contested by the likes of Geb or Terra depending on what you need for the comp, but I think you can just kind of pick Athena onto any comp and do well. But where she really shines is on comps that can burn beads and Magi's Cloak super easily. Pair her with an Ares in solo or jungle and then taunt away their beads and Magi so Ares can get free ults or do it the other way around. She does very well into Erlang, Skadi and AMC due to their lack of CC immunity in their kit, so they have to force beads and or buy Magi's against her and just get farmed. Athena just seems like an all-round strong support pick right now, and I'd be happy to have her on pretty much any team. So that's it for my thoughts on the top 3 gods for each role in patch 6.9, Queen of the Underworld. Of course, if you have a different opinion, then feel free to leave your thoughts down below and why you disagree, and if this helps you out, then drop a like and share it around with anyone else who needs a good dose of meta info. But other than that, I'll catch you guys in another video later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.